Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Fabio Rivera, the Program and Events Coordinator at the PGA, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this Q&A today with one of the creators and showrunners of Roar, Liz Flahive. Before we get started, we'd like to say a quick thank you to Apple TV for making today's panel possible. Leading this conversation today is Antonia Blythe, Deadline Senior Awards Editor. Antonia has been an entertainment writer for over 9 years. Her work has been published on Deadline, Elle, and The Guardian, among other places. Antonia, thank you for being here, and I'll turn this on over to you.
Thank you, Fabio, and welcome, Liz. I'm so excited to talk to you about this incredible anthology series that really explores what it means to be a woman. It's based on Cecilia Ahern's book of short stories. Obviously, people will know your work already from, among other things, Nurse Jackie, Homeland, and Glow, for which you were Emmy nominated. So I'm very excited to talk to you about Roar. I can only imagine creating this show has to feel kind of like a dream come true. I mean, it's such a rich, immersive experience watching it. Okay. Does it feel like this was something that is kind of a career pinnacle so far for you? Because it does seem like a really exciting project.
It was really thrilling. I mean, I think like in terms of a dream, it was more like a fever dream because it was just such a wild thing to create. You know, I think Carly Mensch, my co-creator, and I, you know, we've both done, you know, episodic television, but had never dipped our toe in the anthology format. And I think what was exciting to us, having been on shows that ran, you know, I was on Nurse Jackie for the entire run of that show for 7 seasons. You know, we did Glow for 3, even though we wrote 4. And I jumped into Homeland when that was well into its run. So I think the idea of doing something where each episode got to stand on its own 2 feet, where they were all so very different to write, to produce, to cast, you know, I think that was really exciting to us. I think both the theoretical excitement and then the actual practice of making an anthology are 2 very different things. It was thrilling to make, but also I think producerially one of the most challenging things we've had to do, even with COVID, which definitely made things more complicated. But I think the excitement for us was the fact that we got to make a rom-com, a Western, you know, a body horror, and dabble in magical realism, which we have not done. So I think for us as creators to be able to stretch ourselves in these ways, it was really thrilling.
I mean, it's essentially like you made 8 movies. It's bananas what you achieved with it.
I mean, it felt in a way also like, I mean, to us, it felt a little bit more like 8, I mean, similarly, like 8 pilots where you just were prepping, you know, you'd figure out, you'd cast, you'd solve a problem, you'd start to make it. And then 8 days later, all those solutions didn't mean anything because you were onto a new set of problems. Which was, you know, to say like incredibly taxing on our crew. And I think they were the real heroes of this project, you know, to ask department heads to world build with you 8 times, you know, over the course of many years is one thing. To have them do it over the course of 1 summer, basically, was a huge, huge undertaking. So we were very lucky to have a lot of our crew from Glow come with us to Roar. In addition to some new friends, but that was a big part of, I think, the success of the series, was having people who were really in it with us.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about how this came to be, you know, the adaptation of Cecilia's work, because there's something I always think is the acid test of an adaptation is, you know, does it bring another level to the experience, or does it feel like a pale imitation of the experience of reading a book? And this is definitely like expansion to a whole other level. And you feel really immersed. It feels like I'm kind of having the experience of being in the book.
Yeah.
Which is really what you're going for, I guess. And you had amazing people executive producing. You had, among other people, Nicole Kidman and Per Sari from Blossom Films, and Bruna Papandrea, these amazing people. Tell us how it all came together.
So, Carly and I were actually in the midst of making Glow season 3, and we're pretty exacting when it comes to taking on new projects. And also we don't always agree on things. So like she'll read a book, she'll love it, I won't love it. So to find something that sort of satisfies the Venn diagram of our taste is really tricky. And we both, and my agent had sent us Roar from Bruna and Nicole, and we read it, and the stories, which are actually incredibly spare for the most part, like some of them are, I think the longest one is like 12 pages. They're bite-sized stories, but each one has sort of a conceit that it gives away in the title, much like our episodes, like the woman who found bite marks on her skin, the woman who ate photographs. And we started reading them, and these images or ideas, like they really stuck with us. And we had that feeling of like, we have no idea how we would make this, but we're so curious if we could. And when we talked to Bruna and Nicole and then to Cecilia, our biggest question was how open Cecilia in particular was to really expanding these stories, because in many ways we would have to have the freedom to really make them our own, to create, to change them, to really dig in and create characters beyond just these kind of sticky images or metaphors. So, once we sort of got that sign off from all of them, and that they really let us sort of do our own thing, we found that there was really a lot of room for us as writers to bring ourselves to the project. And then when we pulled in other writers, we had these incredible writers we've known for a long time that we've been dying to work with, Janine Neighbors, Vera Santamaria, Hallie Pfeiffer, all really seasoned, some playwrights, 2 of them playwrights turned TV writers, incredible women. We sent them the book and allowed them to kind of have the same process we did, which was we were like, read the book and tell us which stories speak to you. And then we'll winnow it down from there and see which ones they really felt passionate about adapting. Because we wanted them to actually bring themselves to the story as well, and make sure like they were expanding it in a way that felt authentic to their voice. And it was a really incredible thing, because I think they all picked stories that maybe we would not have honed in on, to include in the collection. Hallie in particular read the stories and she's like, I really love the duck one. And we were like, oh, the duck one in the book is like it's like it didn't really do anything for us. It was just a woman having a bad day and a duck talked to her in a park and made her feel better. And she's like, yeah, but that duck was just mansplaining the whole time, and I felt like he was a real asshole. And I was just thinking, like, what if this woman gets into a toxic relationship with a duck, and it's the story of that? And I was like, can we do that? I don't know. Can you write it? And we broke it together, and she wrote it. And then we spent, then we brought it to Apple and the producers, and they were all a little freaked out. And then Nicole Kidman was the one who's like, if we're not doing this story, I don't know why we're doing this series. Like, the whole point of this series is to be this wild, is to go out on these limbs, is to like see how far we can push these stories and these ideas. So that was, like that process for us in terms of an adaptation, giving us room, like giving us a solid foundation and a strong sort of spine or impulse for the series, but then really allowing us and the other writer producers to like move around in those stories was what we were really looking for.
So I was actually going to bring up, of course, The Woman Who Was Fed by a Duck, starring the amazing Merritt Weber, who is just a phenomenal actor. And I know, I had read about this because you directed this. This was your directorial debut. And it's a really difficult thing, because you're dealing with, say, for example, the love scene. Mm-hmm. How do and this is something that I'm curious about, how much was on the page? How much did you collaborate on how to present that? How did you even figure that out? Because I was kind of scared for you, knowing it was coming up. I was like, how is she going to do? I mean, it turned out great. I mean, it was very elegantly done.
Thank you. I mean, I think everything in this series, required a level of, it was rigorous to make it. And I think, something like, simply like, how do you put a duck and a woman in a sex scene in a way that both is cinematic and emotionally honest and, you know, physically safe. And, you know, so it was, and we really approached that episode just like we would any other episode. You know, we had an intimacy coordinator, we had animal wranglers, we had a double, we had, you know, our DP Q Tran and I, you know, storyboarded and shot listed, and we had a lot of safety meetings, and it was a closed set, both for the animals and the humans. And it was, you know, I think like everything else, it was just a ton of planning and everyone treating it with a degree of seriousness. Like it wasn't a gag. It was being shot with the same intention that you would shoot any other kind of a sex scene. It just had different requirements. So yeah, I mean, it was in many ways, the thing that was so incredible is that we were so prepared for the ducks to not do things like hit their mark or be able to look in a particular way. And our trainers did such an amazing job that I think even Merritt was surprised at how much she liked acting opposite a duck. And to say, we also had Justin Kirk, who was a phenomenal talent, actually on set with us. So Merritt was able to have him acting sort of into her ear, but out of her eye line, and have the duck acting physically opposite her. And she had said, you know, when we were talking about it, she's like, I didn't realize like how alive it would feel, because I didn't know how Justin was going to deliver a line, and I didn't know how the duck was going to react. So I had these two, you know, things sort of coming at me, and I just had to be so present in the scene. It was pretty extraordinary, and so strange and weirdly joyful. So yeah, it took a lot of, and you know, it was one of those things where we shot the duck episode right after we had come in from shooting our Western, which we had done in Santa Clarita in 110-degree heat. So, you know, it was like, again, like our crew just mentally transitioning from that to, you know, being on a stage in a, you know, with multiple ducks.
It's wild.
It's wild. It was wild.
Completely wild. So, you know, speaking of having these great talent actors, someone like Merritt, who, you know, so brilliant in this. Tell me about actually the casting process, because I'm kind of curious for people, when you were approaching talent and they hadn't read the book, what's your kind of log line for the show? How were you telling them about it?
I mean, I think our little like quippy phrase was like, it's 8 surrealist feminist fables. And I think the thing that helped us is that we had all the scripts written. So when we were approaching talent, we were not just handing them a book and a pitch. We were, you know, we had scripts, which was incredibly helpful. So I think I think in that we had scripts, we were able to get on the phone with actors and actually talk about our intentions across the series, talk about how these things, you know, even though these episodes stand alone, what the other episodes were going to be. And as it was kind of all taking shape, we were able to have a process with each actor and get their feedback on their characters and do another draft, either ourselves or with our writers, which, you know, allowed them to have ownership over those characters at an earlier stage too. Because I do think that it is like doing a pilot or like doing a, you know, a short film where you take this character beginning, middle, end, and you leave them. So I think we really wanted to feel like, you know, the actors who are all incredible talents, like actually got, you know, had some time to sort of have a process, both with us, with the director, which was lovely. But that was definitely a part of, I mean, we like doing that even when we're doing, you know, episodic, like we would always be tweaking things, you know, as we talked to actors and started working with them on Glow, on Nurse Jackie, like all the, you know, I think from us coming from theater and being in a rehearsal room and feeling like the more you can write to the actor, the more you can adjust to the actor in a way that feels you know, like really just advantageous for everybody, and fun, because I think, you know, we were really figuring, and we were also in many ways, you know, as much as you're figuring things out before you start shooting, there are a couple, like in particular, Alison Brie's episode, that there was something we hadn't even figured out until we hit the set, which was, you know, she plays a ghost and there's all this overlapping dialogue in the script. But then as we were shooting it, we're like, oh, she, you know, they were all waiting for each other to talk, and it wasn't making sense as like a ghost story, but it wasn't making sense to our sound people to figure out how to shoot it. So we literally stopped filming for a second and had like a whole new rehearsal, brought in our sound guy, talked to Allie and Chris and Hugh, and we were like, okay, we're going to do a couple different versions. We're going to do the version where Allison just talks over you and you guys keep going, like you don't hear her. We're going to do a take where you guys pantomime your lines and she just talk. Like we tried all these different things to see what was going to get us the right result, because it was just a thing where we're like, oh yeah, sound was a thing that like we could rehearse and talk about it and get the characters right, but there was this technical element that we didn't totally crack until we were on set filming. So again, it was like a bunch of people who are really game to jump in and like experiment too, because these were, you know, it was new for all of us.
I love seeing you reunite with Alison Brie and Chris Lowell following Glow. It's so nice to see them together. I love that episode, The Woman Who Solved Her Own Murder. I mean, my favorite part is where she leaves the note for the sheriff's deputy that says, ask for a promotion. There's just so many great little gem moments in the show like that. I do want to go back to, you mentioned this earlier, the women who found bite marks on their skin.
Yeah.
With Cynthia Erivo, fantastic. She's just phenomenal. And I know that you co-wrote that with Carly. And I think you did that first, right?
That was the first one we wrote.
Tell us about why that particular story resonated. I mean, for me, it was really moving. I mean, I just wanted to know like the origin of choosing that.
I mean, I think for us, it was a very easy connection. I have 2 kids. Carly, at the time you wrote it, had 1, but at the time we started making Glow, had 2 small children. And I think the idea of maternal guilt and, you know, work-life imbalance is something we, you know, deal with all the time, and to see it sort of literalized in this way, and allowing us to sort of play with it in a genre we hadn't played with before was really exciting to us. I mean, I can barely watch a horror movie, so actually, even when we wrote her, you know, the moment where she takes the tooth out of her hand, we both, like in editing, just can barely watch it. You know, I think it was one of the more personal adaptations, I think, for both of us. And you know, Cynthia and Rashida Jones, who directed it, did a spectacular job. And it was really, you know, it was wild when we were making it. Q Tran, our DP, who also has 2 little kids, and Rashida, who has a little kid, and we, like, all of us were there late. And at one point, there were like 6 women saying goodnight to their kids on their phones and then going to work. And I'm like, it's the episode. But it really, I don't know. I mean, I think that one for us was very easy to connect to. And it was really wild to figure out, you know, the sort of the scale of the sort of VFX makeup and how we wanted that to grow, and how much you want to make sure you're both like pulling people in. And I think Jake Johnson and Cynthia did such an amazing job, you know, creating this incredibly warm, funny, real relationship that, I don't know, like you feel that love and that strain when people have small children in particular. So I don't know, that was really for us, the one we immediately connected to. Felt like we understood how it could tell that sort of story in a way that we hadn't seen yet.
I'd really love to hear too about shooting The Woman Who Ate Photographs, because I believe that you shot it in Australia with
Yeah.
Nicole. And obviously she's an EP as well. So tell me about that whole experience. You know, there's a lot going on. And I'm absolutely fascinated by I think it was like rice paper and marzipan that she's eating.
Correct.
I
Yeah.
mean, once I'd read about that, I was like looking at really close up trying to spot it.
I mean, well, Nicole is spectacular. And I think as an EP, she was so all over everything and so supportive of what we wanted to create, that we had spent so much time on the producerial side with her that all of a sudden I was like, oh, right, she's another one of our leading ladies. And now we get to be, talking to her as an actress, which was thrilling, like so beyond thrilling. And, shooting concurrently in Australia during COVID was a huge undertaking, but we had an incredible crew there.
Did you go to Australia? Because I know they were on like such a strict lockdown.
We were on such a strict lockdown. I flew over, and the minute I got there, COVID was spiking and the internal borders started to close. So we lost half of our locations, I think, the minute I got to Australia.
So not stressful then?
Stressful at all. But I mean, the thing with Nicole that was so amazing is she was on her, she was on her home turf, which was so, I think, exciting and relaxing for her. And the crew was just so game. And it was really run and gun. Like it felt like we were suddenly making an indie film in Australia, with some of the greatest actors of all time. So it was great. And she is as collaborative as she is as a producer. She's like twice as collaborative as an actor. She is just doing things multiple times. She's like, I think I'll try it this way this time. And she was so excited to gobble the photographs that we're like, you maybe need to slow it down. Because I think one day when she was binging them, she got like some cuts on her mouth from the rice paper. So I'm like, slow down on the photograph gobbling. But it was so, I don't know, it was really amazing to see her bring that episode to life. And her daughter actually played her younger self in some of the photos.
Oh,
so
wow.
it was a real family affair on
Cool.
set too, which was incredible. And again, just gave it like this authenticity and life, and so yeah. But it was definitely, again, COVID kept making things difficult for everybody during that period. But I think, in particular, we were shooting a road trip episode and we kept getting squeezed geographically. But luckily, Australia has so many gorgeous areas that even though we were staying right outside of Sydney, we got a lot of landscape in there.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the overarching themes of the whole series. Obviously, it addresses gender identity, female experience, gender roles, and much more, and toxic relationships, so many things. What were some key things that you and Carly knew that you wanted to convey? And also, what were those conversations you had early on about how you're going to really ace this project? Because it's such an overwhelming prospect, surely.
It is. And I think, a lot of our conversations were, what makes a Roar story? Like, there were certain, and there are a lot in the book. I think there are about 30 some stories in the book. And we kicked around a few that didn't make it because I think sometimes the metaphor felt like it didn't have the same legs, narratively. I think, like a lot of our questions were, can we tell this story about bite marks and sustain it for, 30 pages? Like, how long can we keep Betty Gilpin on a shelf narratively? And I think that, it's like, can we actually tell an arc of like an emotionally abusive relationship with a duck? Like, can the sort of magic or the metaphor carry us all the way through? in a way that will feel satisfying. And I think like when we found the stories that did that, um, we knew that was one to include, and that was sort of part of our litmus test. If it felt like we were straining to hold on to the idea or the metaphor, like that one felt like, all right, maybe that's a little too slight, or maybe it's a little too literary. It doesn't like, it just didn't hold the same, it couldn't hold the same narrative weight. So that was something we talked about. And I think also like something we talked about early on, because I think the pressure of an anthology is, are people going to watch all of them if you don't have some sort of a through line? And we played with that for a while. And I think our feeling was the magic and the fact that you had these like women singularly as the focus, like they're the female protagonist is in every single scene, it's very female centered. And that felt like enough for us. Like we didn't have to create a conceit where we, pull the character all the way through all of the stories or something. So I think once we figured those two things out, that we wanted the magic of the show to be that there were these very different episodes that smashed up against each other, and you could watch a rom-com with a duck and a Western with two teenage girls and, a ghost story. And they would all sort of work on you together until you felt like you had a sort of really strange experience of the collection. That was exciting, like watching them. And it's funny, I've heard from so many people, because I was like, I don't know how people watch anthologies. I don't have people have the data, but they're all so different. And people really did watch all of them, from what we're hearing, which is thrilling.
I did. It was kind of addictive. Like it was like reading an addictive book. Because I know I keep going back to that because it was.
No, but the book is like that too. And it's funny, when we read the book, you're like, I'll just read a couple. Like, I mean, short story collections do that. Like I love them, but also like you read a few and you put it down and you come back.
Yeah.
Sure, people watched it that way too, but more often than not, and our writers said this too, we sent them the book and they're like, I thought I'd read a couple, and then I just kept going. And I do feel like, and I think again, part of what we learned making them was, there isn't a lot of, I think there is depth of character, but we're not like dealing in backstory on like, it's like you get on the ride, you meet the people and you go, and we take you somewhere. And I think if you're on board for the experience, that is what happens. Like, you're like, I'm going to get on another ride, and this one is going to be a totally different ride. But it is, we kind of jump in right away, to each of them. They're not kind of a slow roll.
I really love the length of them too. I think it's like the perfect bite-sized consumable, because themes are quite heavy. So therefore you're kind of making it palatable and enjoyable and entertaining with a fairly heavyweight theme.
I think so too. I mean, I think we love a packed half hour, but I think if they were hour long, like I think it would have made it somewhat easier to make, maybe, because we would have had a little bit more time on both sides. But I think it was right, because I don't think they overstay their welcome, but I think they still stay with you. And that was what we wanted. I think it was like, you get on, something weird happens, and like the ideas linger, the characters linger.
Absolutely. So it does feel like a condensed, impactful experience. And that was something I really enjoyed, was the length. I do feel like, this is probably an unpopular thing to say, but I do feel like, certainly these days, a lot of things tend to be a little too long. And it's almost like there's a sort of quantity over quality thing that can happen. And this is I love it. It's so spare in terms of like, there's no fat on this. And that is something I really enjoyed.
That was part of that was by design, for sure. I mean, I think it is, and it doesn't make it easy on anyone. But there is something to be said for, how, and it's not going fast to go, because I don't think people have the attention span. I think you just have to decide, and luckily we have gotten to, we've gotten to say like, oh, this really feels like it'll be half an hour, and it will feel like enough. It'll feel like more. But I think It felt very right to us. Like, you know, one day we'll make something that's an hour and that would be right too. But, you know, it was, I'm glad to hear you say that, because for us, it was, again, like it also forces, like, you don't want to be indulgent either. You know, I think like, especially when things get to be like beautiful and cinematic, like you can get very sucked in. Um, and I think like if Glow taught us anything in particular, which was, you know, we were serving so many characters in a very short amount of time every episode, you know, like you got to the heart of stuff. And then if you were allowed to breathe a little bit, you really earned it, you know, like you were. And I think there's something that feels good about that too. But yeah, I think we really, we thought about just like wanting the magic to feel important, both to the character and to the story, and not just sort of weird for weird's sake.
Absolutely. I was going to say that as well. Like, I really appreciate that you're just not trying to be kooky, because you can, and because that I feel like audiences always know when
They do.
they're
I mean,
being.
I think there's something, you know, I love something that's just, you know, imagistically beautiful and strange and works on you in these sort of subterranean ways. But I think for us, we're like, is it moving the story? Is it moving the character? It was the same thing we felt about the wrestling and Glow, frankly. Like, it couldn't be ornamental, it couldn't be overlay, it couldn't be spectacle. It had to move story or character, and ideally both. So if it was doing that, then it felt like you were getting a totally different thing out of it. Like, then it feels layered, then it feels propulsive, as opposed to just sitting in something that feels cool. You know, you know, and I think for us, that was, I think it's just how we build.
I mean, that's good storytelling. If it doesn't move the
Yeah.
story forward, it shouldn't be there.
Yeah. And I think, you know, again, it was one of those, it was a way we were able to kind of not just justify, but like metabolize this huge undertaking, where it's like, you know, if one person asks, why are we doing this? Like, you have an answer.
Yeah.
And like, you know, sometimes you're like, one day I feel like maybe I'll be like, because it's awesome, we're doing this for 12 hours.
Yes.
But I do think there's something that's like, no, we're like, this is very clearly, you know, deeply important to the story that we're telling. You know, and I think, again, when you're asking, like the same way, like you're asking people to throw their bodies around, you're asking somebody to be in, you know, VFX makeup for hours and hours, you're like, we're doing it because we're telling the story of this, and this moves this forward.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
So my last question is the question. There are, as you mentioned, I think some 30 stories in the original book. Have you got thoughts on what you might do next with a second season?
I mean, when we devised the first season, we're like, part of the reason we did 2 stories that were not in the book was to sort of kick the tires and see if there was room to sort of create Roar stories outside of the book. So while there are stories in the book that I still feel like we would love to adapt, there are also stories that I think could be created that were inspired by the season or the book, that other people could say like, oh, this is my version of a Roar story. Or a writer director could say like, this is my vision for this episode, if there was appetite for a second season. So yeah, I hope so. I think, you know, it's an endless well.
I mean, I can imagine that there's a lot of great talent that could come up with some brilliant follow-ups. So yeah,
I think so. I mean, you know, just getting to work with all these wonderful female writers and female directors, and letting them do their thing was, again, like really thrilling.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. I mean, this is an incredible piece of work, and I got so much out of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonia. It was lovely speaking with you. And thank you.
You too. Take care, Liz. Thanks so much.